Right, hello there fellow WordPress developers. I'm Mark from High Rise Digital, and in this video today what I want to show you is two things. We're going to look at how to build a plugin in WordPress. So if you've never built a plugin before, this is going to go through a very simple plugin to show you how to get one working in the WordPress. And we're going to show you how to make that plugin extensible so that you can make changes to it in the future without breaking things, allow others to change the features in that plugin as well. So we're going to make a plugin today which is a social sharing widget. Sorry, not a social sharing widget, a social profiles widget. So essentially we're going to give somewhere in WordPress for a user to be able to add the social profile URLs, and then we're going to output those as a widget in WordPress so that the user can stick a widget in one of the widgetized areas, and it'll output a list of those social profile links. Now I'm just going to use the default WordPress theme at the moment, which is 2020. I've got nothing else running on this site at all. It's nice and simple, and we're going to get stuck into this right now. So here is my default WordPress install at wp-test.test. This is just on my local development machine, and I've got absolutely nothing special in here. So if I go into the Appearance tab, you can see I'm just running the 2020 current default WordPress theme. And if I go into the Plugins folder, the only thing I've got is the Query Monitor plugin, which is a great plugin for debugging, just to make sure that anything that gets that's wrong with my code is picked up before obviously this plugin is finished. Hopefully there'll be nothing wrong with my code, but we'll see. So let's get stuck in straight away. So I've got my code editor here, Sublime Text. I've got the project set up on the left hand side, nothing special there. And what we're going to do is get stuck in and actually write some code. So the first thing we need to do in the plugins folder is to create a folder for our plugin, and we're going to give it a unique slug. So I'm going to call it HD. We always prefix things with HD at High Rise Digital, and we're going to call it an extensible social profiles widget. Enter. So we've now got a folder for our plugin. And then we can start to write our plugin in this file. Now it's going to be a single file plugin. In reality, you'd probably want to split this into certainly a few files just to make your code nice and easy to read. It's not actually that long in terms of its length, in terms of number of code. I think we've got 360 odd lines. So confession here, I've actually got this code already written just over to my right here, which you can't see. And I'm just going to be copying and pasting chunks of that code, talking you through what I'm doing, and then we can test it at various stages. The reason why I do that is because I'm not great at typing and commentating at the same time, and obviously you don't want to waste time with spelling errors and things like that. You want to just get stuck into how to create a plugin in WordPress and how to make it extensible. So let's get started straight away. So every plugin in WordPress, for it to be recognized as a plugin, needs to have the plugin headers. So here are the plugin headers for this particular plugin. So it's a PHP comment in essence, and it has specific things that determine it to be a plugin in WordPress. So we've got the plugin name here, and I'm just calling this the HD Extensible Social Profiles widget. The plugin URI is the sort of the website URL where the plugin resides. So I've just put our homepage at highrise.digital, and then the description describes what the plugin actually does. So here we've got adds the ability to add social profiles to a site and then output them as a widget. We've got the version, we've got the license, we've got the author name, the author URI. Again, I've just put our website, and then we've got this text domain. This text domain needs to be the same name as the folder that you have created your plugin to be called. So in this case, it's hd-extensible-social-profiles-widget. A bit long and wordy, but it works. That is used for things like translating into different languages when you're using those sorts of things. I'm not going to go into those in this particular demonstration, but you can learn more about those as and when you want to. So the next thing to do is I always tend to put at the top of my plugins a couple of things. So, excuse me, if someone wants to access this file without loading WordPress, I'm basically saying deny that. So if the abs path of WordPress, that's the absolute path of where WordPress is installed, is not defined, just exit and don't run any code. Then we're going to define a couple of constants for our plugin. We don't actually need them, I don't think, in this instance, but I always define these in plugins to make reference in the location of the plugin in terms of the server path and the location in terms of a URL, much easier to reference. So if you're loading things like assets or scripts or styles, you can reference those much easier. So I'm defining a constant of HD, that's High-Rise Digital, underscore ESPW, easy, extensible social profile widget location, and that's going to be directly to the the folder that I'm currently in. And then I'm going to define the URL, which is going to be the URL of the current WordPress plugins folder, and then the file that I'm in, that's the reference to where that is. So that will be how that's defined as well. So those are, as I said, are really useful. Now you can see these prefixes that I've put on here. These I'm going to use throughout my plugin. So I've decided that I'm going to prefix everything with HD, ESPW with underscores, so that it's not going to clash with the names of any other functions, hopefully, that someone else might have written in their plugin. So they're kind of namespacing this particular plugin so that it's not going to clash and break with other things. Now, we're adding social profiles to our site. So the first thing I want to do is I want to provide the ability for someone to get a list of the social profiles that this plugin supports. This is part of the extensibility feature. So the concept here is that we're going to allow someone to register a social profile, so like LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever, and then the plugin is going to handle providing the setting for that so that you can add the URL, and it's going to handle the output of that in the widget as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a very simple function which basically allows me as a developer or other developers to get a list of the social profiles that are being used. So I've created a function here, HD ESPW get social profiles. Just note the little comments above just explains what the function does and what it returns. So this is going to return an array. You can see that here. It's an empty array to start with, but it is passed through a filter called HD ESPW social profiles. So this means other developers can now interact with that array. They can add things to it, they can modify things in it, and they can remove things from it. So if another developer wants to add a social profile, they don't need to change this code, they can do it themselves. And when we finish the plugin, I'll show you how that you can interact with that and change it. So dead simple, function that just returns an empty array that is filterable. So the plugin is going to support some default profiles. I'm just going to use 2 or 3 in this instance, I think it is. So the first thing we need to do next is to register the default profiles that we want the plugin to have when someone installs it. So basically, we're going to fill this array on here with some of the default profiles. So let's have a look at how we do that. Let me just grab this piece of code over here, and then we'll put that at the bottom. Just going to put some enters, then the comments, then the code isn't sort of at the bottom of the screen. So again, a nice easy comment to read, a doc block as it's called, registers the default social profiles. It accepts an array called profiles, which are the current registered profiles that are there. That's the current value of this array in the social profiles that we're passing through this filter. And it returns a modified array. So it might be that I change that array and then I've got to return it at the end, which is here. And what we do is we hook into the social profiles filter that we created in this function here, and then we attach our function, this one, HD ESPW register default social profiles, to that filter. So coming in here is our empty array. We're going to fill that array with some information, and then we're going to return it at the bottom here. So for each one of these, I'll just talk through the Facebook one because they're all the same. We're giving the array a key. Now that's important because we want someone to be able to remove this, and having a key makes that much easier. They don't have to search the array values. And we're then setting some information. So we're giving each one an ID, and I've prefixed that again with my little prefix just to make sure that that's unique to this plugin. I'm giving it a label. Notice how the label is translatable, passing it through WordPress's translation function and passing the text domain of this plugin to that, called Facebook URL. So I'll put your Facebook URL in here. I'm giving it a class, which means that we're going to use that on the output of the widget later on. It's got a description, tell the user what to do here, a priority so that we can order these in the customizer, which is where we're going to actually do these. and it's got a type of text, which means that it'll be a text input in the customizer. It doesn't have a default value, so if the user doesn't enter anything, we don't want to have a default value because we don't really want to use it. And we're passing a sanitization callback that is used by WordPress to make sure that what we enter into this text field is not going to cause any harm and it's properly sanitized before it's saved. And sanitized text field does exactly what it says on the tin, it sanitizes the text field. There might be a better one than that for a URL because we are entering a URL, I've just thought, but hey ho, we'll stick with that one for now. And then we're doing the same thing for LinkedIn and we're doing the same thing for Twitter before we return them. So once this code has run here, if we then ran the function get social profiles, it would return this array here with these 3 different options in. So we've managed to register the social profiles we want to support. We've created a function for them that will get them from the database for us so that we can get a list of all the ones that we support. So the next thing to do is actually get those displaying in the customizer, which is where we're going to allow the user to enter their social profiles. Now to do this, we need to create a function that is hooked into the customizer register hook, which allows us to add fields and panels and things into the customizer. So let's take a look at that next. So I've created again a function called hdespw, always prefixed, theme register social customizer settings. In fact, I don't think we need theme register in there, so because it's not a theme. So let's remove that one. And then that gets passed a WP customize object, which I can then use to create my new settings and panels and things that I need to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the registered social profiles. And then I'm going to check they're not empty because if no one's registered any social profiles, then there's nothing to do. I don't need to add a section and I don't need to add any settings to the customizer because there's literally nothing there for the user to do. So assuming that that's not empty, I am then going to add a section to the customizer. So if we look at the customizer and we flip back over to our website and go into the customize section, if we look at the customizer in here, these are the sections of the customizer. So you can see this is the 2020 theme and it's got a few of its own default ones. So I'm going to add a new section in the customizer and I'm going to call it hdespw social. So that's its ID, its reference ID. And then I'm going to pass some settings to that. So the title of it, we're going to call it social profiles. A little description, what do they need to do, add your social profiles here. And we're going to pass it a priority so that it orders it in the list, depending on whether you want it at the bottom, at the top, in the middle, or wherever it might be. Now this capability here says basically anyone with the capability of edit theme options can see this and add their profiles. If you wanted authors to be able to do this, only administrators to be able to do this, you could change that capability. But it makes sense, if you can set the theme up, you probably want to set the social profiles, so I'm going to pass that as the capability. Then we know we've got registered social profiles, and we know that's now an array, so I'm going to loop through that array, and now I'm going to say for each social profiles as social profile. So social profile, in this case, now contains one of these array items. So this one, for example, for Twitter. So for each one of those, we're going to add a setting to the customizer, and the setting is going to have the ID of whatever ID we've set. So in this case, it's going to be hdespw Twitter URL. And then we're going to pass it in a small array, the default value, which we know we don't want, and we're going to pass it a sanitized callback, which is the one that was registered when the social widget, when the social profile was registered. So that's the setting, and then a control to control that setting, which is like the user input. We're going to add control. Again, it's the same ID, so this control controls this setting. And then we've got the other features such as the type, which is the text. So again, I'm grabbing that from the array that when we registered it. And then the priority, the label, the description, all coming from that array. And then the section is the section that I registered up here, which is the social section. So that means that those are now registered in the customizer. So let's just take a look at that. We're just going to save our plugin and we're going to give it the same name as the folder name. So HD extensible social profiles widgets. I can't type and talk at the same time. There we go. And then make sure it's in the right place. which is not. Where is my folder? Plugins, in there, and save. Excellent. And then we can go back to our website. Let's just close that. We'll go to plugins. There's our plugin. So you can see we've added it to the list now. There's the description of the plugin. There's the version, the link to the plugin author, etc. So I can activate that. Here's where WP Query might moan at me if it's something wrong. No, nothing's wrong. That's good. So you can see WP Query at the top here is just going to report any errors if there was any, but it's happy. All green, all good. So let's go into the customizer now. And let's check it's worked. So there we go. We've got a new setting called social profiles. And we've got our 3 social profiles: Facebook URL, LinkedIn URL, and Twitter URL. Yeehaw, we're there. Good, that's working. So now we've got the ability for someone to add a profile and for someone to add the link to save it so that they can say, look, here's my URL for my Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, etc. So next thing is to move on to the actual widget itself. How do we get those to display in WordPress? So we're going to create our very own widget in WordPress, which is actually much easier than you would think. Now, I know you're all going to tell me that why are you doing a widget, Mark? Because you should be doing a block, because they're all going to be blocks. Well, they're not at this point. There's still widgets still working, so I'm going to stick with a widget, and maybe we'll convert this into a block at some point in the future. So first thing to do when creating a widget is we need to register the widget with WordPress. So I'm creating a function here called register social icons widget. It's hooked into the widget in its action. So basically when widgets are loaded in WordPress, load my function, and then I'm registering the new widget called HTESPW social icons widget. Now this is going to be the name of my class, which I'm going to use in a second to create the actual widget. So you'll see that in a second. So let's just grab the code for the social widgets class that we're going to build. So you can see I'm extending the widget class. So this is how widgets are built. And I'm just creating a function here, a class name here, sorry, which is the same one that I registered here. So these sort of marry up here. Now, when you're creating a widget, there's a few things you need to do. Now, the first thing is you need to create like a setup for the widget. So that's the construct function. Now, I'm not a very good object-oriented PHP person, so if I'm saying the wrong things here, then please excuse me. Let me know what the right things are. I generally don't use classes and things like that. So, yep, terrible I know, but it works for me. So these are something that is perhaps a little bit new to me as well. So, so the first thing is to create some sort of settings for the widget. So what class name is the widget going to use when it's dropped onto the page, and what's the description of this widget, so that when you see the widget in the widgets screen in WordPress, what does it do? What does the description say, so the user knows what it is? And again, this is run through the translation function __ with the text domain that we set at the start. So output your site social icons based on the social profiles added to the customizer. I think we should say there. Then it's clear. And then we give it an ID base, and what we do then is we use the construct method in the parent class, which is WP widget, to add those things to it, which is done like that. This would be the name of the widget that we're going to use. We're going to call it social icons. Maybe that should be through a translated function as well. I'm not entirely sure. Someone will no doubt want to correct me on that one, which is fine. So that's the widget kind of setup. Now, what we do when we're creating a widget is we basically override some of the functions in this parent class that, with our own functions for our own widget. And there's a few of them to do. So the first one itself is called the widget class. So let's just have a look at that one. Sorry, the widget method, I believe they're called when we're inside of a class. So we've got a public function called widget, and this is what controls the actual output on the front end of your website. Now, we want to make this as extensible as possible. So instead of just in here getting all the profiles and then spitting out some HTML and stuff, what we're going to do is we're actually going to run a hook that someone can hook into and stick their own content in. So let me just paste this in and then I'll talk it through you. Now when you register a widget in WordPress, you can have HTML before and after the widget. Now if I can find it, excuse me, in the 2020 theme, I think it's in functions actually. Let me have a look. So widgets, where are the widgets registered? Styles, scripts, menus, logos, sidebars. Here we go. So 2020 sidebars. So you can see the setting before title, after title, before widget, and after widgets. And they're just adding a div class here with a counter on that's going to show. It's not a counter, the ID of the widget, so that it gets your unique ID and class. So we need to make sure that we output those. Otherwise, the user's going to be confused because they've registered a widget with one there and then we're not outputting it. So to do that, we're just going to echo the args that's passed into here, which is the widget arguments. So that what gets passed into our widget function is the widget arguments and the instance of the saved values of the widget. So if you've got any fields on the widget screen that you want to fill in, that's where you get them from. So we're going to run that through WP cases post just to make sure there's nothing dodgy in there, and then we're going to output the before widget, and at the bottom we're going to output the after widget args. So in this case, the before widget is going to output div class widget content, and then the after one's going to output div closing div tags. Then we're going to run an action. We're going to create our own WordPress action called HD ESPW social icons widget output. So the idea is that anyone can hook into this action to do stuff, and functions that are attached to this action get the widget args and the instance. So they get all of that data that this function gets passed into. Now what I've done here is I've just explained what these widget arguments are, and I've explained what the instance is, and then I've basically said these are the functions that are going to be hooked into this widget, hooked into this action from this plugin. It's really handy because if you want to find out what the markup of the widget is, it's really difficult because you come to look in here and you've just literally got this action rather than the actual markup. So I'm saying, hey, have a look for this function and this function to find out what actually is going to be outputted in here. And we'll define those functions in a minute. Now the reason why I do it like this is because anyone can unhook these if they don't like the look of them and they want to control the markup themselves, rather than having to sort of mess around fiddling with this function and doing all sorts of crazy things. So anyway, that's how the widget function is output. Now the next function that we need to look at with widgets is the form function. So the form function controls the actual widget form that you see in WordPress. So if we come out of the customizer for a second and we go into appearance and widgets, then this is the form. So and this is the text widget and this is the form. So it's the fields that you see in here. Now in our case, we actually haven't got much to control in there because we don't want the user entering the profiles in there. The reason why we don't want that is because they might want to use those social profiles somewhere else on the website. So I don't want them attached to a single widget. I want them set globally, and then the widget just pulls those global values. So for us, we don't actually have much in here, but what I do want to provide the option for the user is the ability to add a title to the widget. So that's the only field that we're actually going to use in this case is the title. So let's just grab this and paste this in here. Just need a closing PHP tag there. So the first thing to do here is to get the saved title. So let's imagine this widget's already been placed on the page, a title's been added and saved. We need to get the title that was saved. So what we're saying here is if the title is not empty, so if the title part of this instance array is not empty, then we're going to use that. Otherwise, we're just going to set it to an empty string, so there is no title. And then I've just followed the same markup as some of the core widgets here. We're going to add a label, we're going to get this field ID, which is the title for this particular widget. output that, and then we're going to add an input which is a text input for the title. And again, this just follows the standard ones of the other widgets that we've got there. And here we make sure we escape these the title itself so that we're not going to get any dodgy stuff in there. So that, if we save that, should then give us a widget. So let's go back to our widgets page and refresh. So here's social icons. I can drag that up here and I've got a title field. Now the reason why it's not saving properly and it came up with that thing is because we haven't defined the save function yet, so let's do that now. Just one thing before I finish on that though, what I do want to do is to just put some instructions for the user, because obviously they've added this social icons widget, but it's not clear actually where they're going to add the social icon or the profile URLs. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a text field. Oops. There we go. I'm just going to add another paragraph here with some information for the user. So to add social profiles, please use the social profile section in the customizer, and then I've linked that to the customize page in WordPress. So here, admin URL customize.php. So when they click on that, it'll take them to the customizer so they can add their profiles, etc. Again, this is using the WordPress's translation functions. Where here's the string we want to translate. We're using printf so that we can push this stuff into this string. Again, that's probably for another video, but it's there and it works. So if we save that now and flip back to our widget and refresh, we should get a little output underneath here that, there we go, that tells us what to do basically. It's like, hey, your profile URLs aren't here, they're over in the customizer, go and find them in there. So next thing is now the update function. So once the person hits that save button on the widget, what actually happens? So this controls the save function, it's called update, and it gets past the new instance of the widgets. That's the new values that go into those fields, and the old instance. So here I'm just going to start off by creating myself an empty array, and then I'm going to kind of do the similar thing. So I'm basically going to add to that a title array element, and I'm going to check that we have a new title. So if we don't have a new title, then we're going to if we do have a new title, so if it's not empty, something new has been saved, then we want to strip the tags from that title. We don't want people to start putting HTML tags in there, and we're going to save that against this. If it's empty, no one's added anything, we're just going to save an empty string instead. And then we're going to return, not return. Oops. We're going to return that to be saved. So WordPress will then save that array to the database, and then if you remember, that is now available up here in our output on the front end. So that's how that works. So let's just quickly go back to our website and add a title. So follow us on social media. Save. There we go. We'll just check it's worked by refreshing that page just to make sure. There we go, and the title's been saved. Perfect. Let's quickly just jump back into the customizer. We can check our link works. Yep, excellent. And we'll add some social profiles in here. Now, I'm not going to mess about adding profiles. I'm just going to stick a hash in to make sure there's a value in there that we can use. And then obviously don't forget to hit publish. And we can come out of that. So we've saved some profile URLs. We've added our widget into the footer area of WordPress. Everything's hunky-dory. Now, what will not happen, of course, is there will be no output because we haven't defined the functions that are going to be hooked in here which do the outputting. So let's do that now. We're going to create a title one and a content one. So let's explain how to do that. So let's start off with the title function. Let's just grab that here. So we're no longer inside this class. Paste that in here. So this outputs the widget title. That's the one we've just entered on the widget screen. Follow us on social media for this widget. And again, this gets past the arguments for the widget. That's the before and after, before title and after title. And it gets past the saved instance of the widget. So that's what the saved title is. So let's have a look what to do. So first of all, we're going to check whether we've got a title. So has the user entered a title? If they haven't entered a title, then we just don't need to do anything because we haven't got a title to do anything with. If they have, then have we got any before title arguments? So does this person who registered this widgetized area want us to put anything before this title? And if they do, let's output that using the WP cases post function. And then we do exactly the same with the after title arguments. And in the middle, we just echo the title that the user's added, making sure that we escape that with HTML because we don't want anyone to put any HTML in that title. So that now, if we save that and go back to our page, if we just go to the home page into the footer, because this is where we put the widget, we should have a widget with a title and nothing else. And there's the title. So if I went into the widget section here and changed that title, follow us on social media, please, and refresh the page. There we go, we've changed the title. That's a bit long, so we'll put it back to what it was. Cool. So the next thing is to get the actual widgets, the actual social profiles outputted. Now, in the real world, you probably want to change these for an icon, probably a bit like these ones. But I am not a front-end developer, so I'm just going to output a list with a link, and someone else can do some fancy work to make that a nice icon. So let's do that next. So let's copy this one, and I'll talk you through it. This is actually the last function, the last piece of code. So back to Sublime. So here is our output, the social widget content. So essentially that's the icons. And again, this function gets past those widget arguments and the instance of the saved widget, which is just the title, which we don't actually need in this instance. So the first thing we need to do is get the registered social profiles. And there we go, we're going to use that function we created right at the start to get an array of those registered profiles. And again, if we don't have any, then we're going to do nothing because there's no point now in outputting nothing. If we do have some, we're going to start an unordered list and we're going to give it a class of HD ESPW social icons. And then we're going to loop through each social icon profile or social profile. And we're going to use the get theme mod to grab the actual profile URL. So that's the URL that they entered into the customizer, which in my case was a hash. So I'm going to get that profile URL. And we're going to grab that from the ID of the social profile, which was set all the way at the top here, which was this ID. So this is like the key for that particular thing in the database. Get me this thing out of the database, this theme mod. Now, if it's empty, so if the user hasn't added a URL for this particular social profile, so they haven't got an Instagram profile maybe, we're just going to carry on through the loop. We're going to forget all this below and we're just going to move on to the next profile in the loop because we don't need to do anything. We're then going to check to see whether the user, when they registered the profile, has added a class. So if they have added a class, we're going to use that class. If they haven't added a class, what we're going to do is we're going to use a modified version of the label. So let me explain that now. So if I go back to the top here, if the user set a class, which we have in this instance, so we've set to use the class of Facebook, then we're going to use that. But what we're saying here is if that's empty, then where we go. If that's empty, then we're going to set the class and we're going to set it to a sanitized version of the label. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this function called sanitized title with dashes, which basically grabs that string Facebook URL and it will lowercase it because I've passed it through string to lower, and it will separate it with dashes so there's no spaces, so it's a proper CSS class. And then we're going to output the list item for this social profile. So I'm creating a list item, giving it a class of social icons item, and then giving it an additional class with the class name that we want on. So it'll have a dash dash Facebook, dash dash LinkedIn, dash dash Twitter, whatever it is. Then we're going to create an A tag. We're going to make it a blank target so it opens in a new tab. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. We're going to give that a class as well, and then we're going to set the URL to the profile URL, making sure we escape all these. So escape attribute for the class, escape URL for the profile URL, and then we're going to add an icon element with an I. So you can use a font icon. I think that's what they do with that one. You could do anything with that. You could have a div, you could have a span, you could have whatever you wanted. And then finally we're going to output the social profile label. So in this case, Facebook URL, and that's escaped as well. And that's that. So that'll output that markup. So let's save that, flip across to our page and refresh. And we should get 3 lists. There we go, yay. So we've now got our URLs for the different ones. And they go through to, you can see the hash in the bottom left-hand side. They will click through to those particular websites, which obviously in this case don't exist. Just have a quick drink. So that is our social profiles, extensible social profiles widget built. And I want to just show you how you might take advantage of those extensible features. So I've got our Mu plugins folder here, and I've got a debugging file. I'm just going to create a new one actually. We'll just create one called test. Just so I can run some code in WordPress essentially. So we'll just save that. We'll call it test.php. And we'll save it in the Mu plugins folder, which is here. Okay, so let's say I'm a developer then, and I don't want the, let's have a look in here. I don't want the LinkedIn one because I don't have any LinkedIn profile. So I want to remove that from the settings and I want to remove it from the output. Now you could argue that just by not filling it in does the job for us, but if they don't have one, let's remove it from the customizer completely. So what we're going to do is create a function called test remove LinkedIn social profile. And this function is going to get past all of the registered profiles. And what we're going to do is we're going to hook that into the filter that we created. And we're going to make sure it happens after the other one. So we're going to pass it an argument of 20 there, priority of 20 rather than 10. We just flip back over here. Let's just grab the name of our filter, which is there. So you can see the core one is hooked in at 10. So I'm going to make sure that mine runs after that, like that. And then what we're going to first do is going to say if we have a LinkedIn profile, finding it very difficult to type and talk. So this key here has got to match the one we used when we registered it, which is there, which is correct. So if we have a LinkedIn, then let's remove it. So we unset it from the array. Like so. Okay, and then we'll save that and we can run that. And something's gone very wrong. I know what that is. We've forgotten to return our social profiles. There we go. So profiles, there we go. Do that. Yeah, I forgot to return those from the filter. If you don't return them, they don't get put into WordPress. So let's try that again and refresh. It's still not worked. So I spelled something wrong. No, they're not called social profiles. They're called profiles. There you go. Bit of live debugging for you. And it's still there for some reason. Why is that still there for some reason? Okay, so it is linked in there. It's hooked into there. That's working. That's working. What is going on? That's because I can't type properly. There we go. It was a profile rather than profiles. That should work. Yay, there we go. So we removed the LinkedIn one. So another developer of another plugin, another theme or something else can then remove the ones that they don't want. And in the same way, they can add ones that they do want. So let's imagine that they want a Pinterest one. Let's just copy one of these. They can register their own. So we'll do Pinterest. Give that the name of Pinterest. Like that. Probably a better way of doing this. Profile URL, text, give it a priority of 50 and save. Then if we go and customize, we should get an extra Pinterest icon in here. So social profiles, there we go, we've got Pinterest. Notice that the LinkedIn one was removed because it has not been registered. Then we can save that and publish. And then if we scroll to the bottom, there's our Pinterest URL. So that's how easy it is to add one. So another developer, they want to add a social profile thing. They don't need to mess with the markup. They don't need to mess with the widget. They don't need to mess with the customizer. All they need to do is basically add something to a list, an array, and it's just as easy as that. So let's imagine that we wanted to remove one of the output things. So let's imagine that we don't want to output the title like that. We wanted to output it in a different way. Then what we could do first of all is we could remove the action that adds the title. So that is, actually I'll just copy all of that because it needs to have the same priority and everything. So we'll remove that, and what that should do, and that depends because this function is it's going to load very early, so it might not actually do it. Let's see if it works. We'll just close the customizer as well, actually. Yeah, it's not done that. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to put that into a function called test remove profiles. So I think the reason why that doesn't fire properly and work is because my code is running before that action is registered. So if I hook that into an init action, it should fire it, I think. Let me just double check this. I'll just explain that in a second if it works. There we go, title gone. So the reason why that didn't work the first time is because this Mu plugin that I've got running is running before my code in my plugin. So WordPress is trying to remove something that hasn't been added yet, and therefore it can't do that. By hooking this function into the init action, that then happens after the plugin has done its stuff. So that's what makes sense. So again, a developer can remove that title, and then of course they could just register their own function. So let's say test add, oops, we're in capitals, custom title, and we know that we get access to the arguments and the instance. Oops. So then we could, we would obviously want to check this correctly, but I'm just going to sort of echo something really simple here. The title, and then we'll just stick that on instance. You want to check whether there's a title present here and everything, I know, but just for the sake of brevity and making it a bit quicker, we'll just do that, and then we'll add that to our action hook that outputs the content of the widget. Save that and refresh, and that should put our new title there that says the title, follow us on social media. Obviously it's not in a heading tag or anything like that. So hopefully that kind of shows you how extensible and how easy it is to create a fairly flexible, extensible plugin. And hopefully if you've never built a plugin before, you've learned a little bit how to build a plugin, and you can find out a bit more about it there. So I hope that was really useful for you. If you enjoyed that, then please consider hitting the like button. Leave me a comment below. Have you created a plugin before? Have you any questions about this plugin that you want to ask me about? Then please feel free to do so. And if you want to listen to more of myself and Keith and Highrise talk about WordPress, then please consider subscribing to this channel where we're going to do lots more stuff like this. Anyway, for now, I will say farewell, and we'll see you again soon.